next session is titled Humor and HIV. Do you think it's okay to make jokes about HIV? What's appropriate? What's not? In this session, James Tison, a brilliant comic from New York City who lives openly with HIV, talks about the relationship between humor and stigma and shares some of their stand-up act with us. They will also be sharing some video during their presentation, so please adjust the volume on your computer as you see fit. And don't forget to please mute your microphone and direct any questions to the question master in the chat room. We'll try to get as many of them as possible. We'll try to get to as many of them as possible after the session. So they're young and they're fabulous and they have such nice skin. Please welcome James Tison.
Hi, yes, thank you for that introduction. Young-ish, I'm 32, but the skin does a lot of work for me. Anyway, hi, yep, so that's the highlights, I think, of what you need to know about me. My name is James Tison, and I'm a New York-based stand-up comic living in New York, and I've been living with HIV for about 3 years. And I started talking openly about my status in my stand-up about a year ago, and the responses from audiences has been shockingly sort of great. So in this talk, HIV and humor, I'm here to share just some of my experience in combating stigma through humor and address this central question: is it okay to joke about HIV? And I want to ask this not just for comedians, but for humans out in the world, teachers, public speakers, healthcare providers, or just people living with HIV. Can we laugh about it? And what lessons can we learn from stand-up comedy that apply to the overall fight against stigma? So to that end, here's what we're going to do. So first, I'm going to play you a 4-minute video. It's a compilation that captures a very condensed version of my HIV material. Second, I'm going to address this central question: can we joke about HIV? Then I'm going to dissect some of the logic behind my jokes, and I'm going to share 3 key lessons that I've learned in crafting this set, because I think they apply beyond just how to do comedy. And finally, I'm going to end on a little bit of a depressing note and talk about the audiences that this set has not worked with, and what I think the lesson is from that. So without further ado, let me share this video with you, and yes, please adjust your volume accordingly. I'm going to take a hard left now in my set, and I want you all to remember the good time that we've had so far. Hold on to that for the next 30 seconds as we push through. And I'll just tell you, spoiler alert, that before I go into it, I'm fine. Okay? I'm healthy. I have nice skin. I'm good. I'm good. Having said that, here we are. 2 years ago, I tested positive for HIV. But so 2 years ago, I tested positive for HIV. Yes. 2 years ago, I tested positive for HIV. 2 years ago, I tested positive for HIV. Ooh, killed the room. As you can see, it kills a room. You're all listening now. And even in this room, like, someone is currently freaking out that fuck, you guys, no, that's not, I'm such an ally. This is, it's one of the straight dudes who's really having a hard time, right? Like, am I about to get HIV from this fucking gay guy, you know? And I'm sorry, but, yeah, probably. And you know what? I'm sorry, but yeah, probably.
you know, chances are good you all already got it. So I hope you like the Rent soundtrack and being told how brave you are, because that's your life now.
No, if you don't know, it's science caught up, right? It's completely manageable. I take 1 pill a day, and I'm undetectable.
It means you can't detect the virus in my system. I can't give it to anybody.
I can ejaculate inside each and every one of you. And you wouldn't catch anything but a good time.
I could ejaculate inside each and every one of you. And you wouldn't catch anything more than a good time. You know? Yep. Yes. And herpes. Yes. Science is still chasing after herpes. You know, people get judgmental. There's nothing I can do about that. I'll say the hardest thing about it is the stigma, and people, like heterosexuals with kids who want to get judgmental about my HIV really crack me up, and here's why. Over 50% of pregnancies in this country are unplanned, which means that straight folks are churning out their little heterosexual fuck monsters in the exact same way that I got HIV, right? By having fun. Misguided fun. Short-sighted choices, but the same genre of fun. But then all the straight people want to look at the gay people and be like, oh, it's a lifestyle determined by lust and it will kill you and ruin your life. And it's like, HIV does not ruin your life. Kids ruin your life. Alright? But I guarantee you that my HIV is less of a social strain than their fucking kids. Okay?
Okay. Exit full screen now. Thank you. Stop the share. Here we are. I hope that you enjoyed that. Thank you for watching. If you did not think it's funny, that's fine. I mostly share that so that I can talk to you about the mechanics of it. And in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. So, the fight against HIV stigma and stand-up comedy have one big thing in common, which is that we're trying to control a conversation. So in the fight against stigma, you're trying to reframe the narrative around HIV, and in stand-up comedy, you're literally trying to control the energy in a room. And I'm not sure if any of you have seen this, but comedian Hannah Gatsby, about a year and a half ago, released her stand-up special, Nanette. Super groundbreaking. I highly recommend. And in Nanette, Hannah Gatsby essentially pulls the curtain back on how a comedian controls a conversation. And she explains that a joke is essentially 2 main components, tension and release. Tension, the comedian states a premise that contains a question or a problem that causes confusion or discomfort in the audience. And release, you as the comedian say or do something unexpected that releases the tension you introduced into the room. So if tension and release is the baseline formula for a joke, then it's also the answer for why I think at this point in our society, we are able to approach HIV with humor. The history of HIV is fraught with tension. Illnesses, deaths, lesions, everything that people think about when they hear HIV, especially if they're not familiar with the scientific advances. But all of that is largely in the past. And if the past is tension, then where are we now? Well, thanks to advances in science and public health policy, the culture of people living with HIV in the first world who have access to healthcare has moved from a space of constant tension to a realm of general release. And of course, there are exceptions to that, and I'm speaking in very broad terms. But I think that our ability to have a sense of humor about HIV is new, and it's a direct result of the progress we've made politically, medically, and culturally. So I'm able to professionally tell jokes about HIV because in living with HIV, I know firsthand the release of it all. I know that I'm healthy. I know how little I actually think about having HIV on a day-to-day basis. But because of the history and the baseline level of ignorance among audiences, it's very easy for me to introduce tension and quickly release it. If we were still in a time where we had no effective treatments, no policies safeguarding our rights to work or lead our lives, and no governmental initiative to stop the spread of the disease, then my take on this would be completely different. And that's something else that I think comedy and combating stigma share. The cultural dynamics that make joking about it possible are the same dynamics that make public campaigns to fight stigma possible. Now, my jokes exist for the same reason this conference does. To me, the message of fighting stigma is to tell everyone, with access to healthcare, we don't need to live in fear anymore. And a joke is doing its job if it can make people less afraid of something that they previously thought was terrifying. And I think we're all here today trying to figure out how to communicate with people in a way that will make them less afraid. So to that end, I want to move forward and look at three key parts of my set and the three big lessons that I have learned in crafting it. So if your goal is to control a conversation with about HIV and stigma, I think these are the things that you should keep in mind. So the first lesson that I've learned is anticipate tension. This is big for me. In that 4-minute video, I spend at least 1 minute bracing for impact. Even in this talk so far, I think I'm at like 12 or 14 minutes. And in 14 minutes, I've told you what I intend to tell you like 3 times. And here's just one more reminder that I'm ending on a bit of a down note. But back to tension, I do this a lot when I'm talking about something controversial, but particularly with HIV, because the one thing that has remained true for all audiences is that the second I say I have tested positive for HIV, the room dies. Every single time. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The worst reason is ignorance, right? People don't know what they don't know. They hear HIV, they freak out. They think trauma, trauma, trauma. But even educated audiences, progressive rooms, gay audiences, even if they know about the medical advances, they don't know my status. They don't know if I'm undetectable. They don't know if I've had any health complications. They don't know if I have health insurance, which is a consideration Americans have to think about. And then there's all the things that I don't know about the audience. I don't know their status. I don't know how many friends they lost. I don't know how much they've been targeted for their HIV status in their life. They may be undetectable and physically healthy, but that doesn't mean that their past or even their present is without pain, and bringing it up brings it up. There's so many things up in the air that cause people to be sort of gobsmacked when you talk about HIV. And it is very frustrating at times because, of course, what I want is for us to be able to have a much more casual conversation about it, but that's simply not where we're at. And I do think that particularly if you as a public speaker or a teacher or a friend or a health provider are going to attempt humor in mixed company, you have to take care of your audience and yourself and know realistically going in that there will be tension, there will be discomfort, there will be anxiety. And you are responsible for managing that anxiety if you're the one trying to make a joke. Now, unfortunately, I think that also means that I've learned I have to manage the tension within myself. So for me, that's why in my set I call out the most base ignorant homophobic reaction that people could possibly have, which is, am I going to get HIV from this gay guy? I hope that that's dumber than anything anyone in the audience is actually thinking, but that's also kind of the point. It calms me to just name the stupidest thing anyone could possibly be thinking so that we can move on. And all of this is to say, do I think we can joke about HIV? Yes. I don't recommend casually dropping jokes about HIV in mixed company or on audiences who weren't prepared, or patients or students or anything. People are going to have very mixed feelings. And some of you might say, you know, I shouldn't have to tiptoe around their discomfort. And you're not wrong. You should not have to do that. But shocking people for the sake of shocking people won't help. It doesn't help me tell a joke. And it won't help you talk about stigma unless it's couched within some level of empathy and understanding for the tension this brings up for people. The next big lesson, and I can't emphasize this enough, is that my set doesn't work if I don't educate the audience. On the one hand, I would argue there's no point in telling a joke about HIV if I'm not going to educate people, especially when you consider how much work there is to be done to educate people. But in my set, the first thing I do once I'm done managing the tension is quickly catch people up on the scientific advances and let them know I'm okay. It's a lot like when you need a dog to take its medicine. The joke is the piece of cheese that you wrap around the pill so you can force it down their unwilling gullets. And if that sounds insulting to audiences, then I mean it that way. But embedded in my material is the very clear message that undetectable is untransmittable. That's the medicine. That's the education. Now, on the other hand, I also do that because if I'm talking to an audience, I can't move any further in the conversation without it, because people will still be too tense wondering if I'm okay. The education around the medication and what undetectable is the ultimate release of that initial surge of, oh my God, he has HIV. The audience has to understand that people, if you're talking to them about HIV, they have to understand that you are fine because the tension that you've introduced won't go away otherwise. And then they won't listen to anything else I have to say. The last big lesson that I've learned is do not apologize. And I feel like this one is a little bit of a mixed, I have mixed feelings about it. If you have HIV, people expect you to feel shame about how you got it. Particularly if you're a gay man, there's a whole litany of things that you're supposed to feel shame about. And pretty much all of those things are steeped in homophobic double standards that even predate the existence of HIV. It's this idea that there's a gay lifestyle and that gay promiscuity leads to self-destruction. And hey, the mere existence of HIV validates that, right? It's this puritanical outlook that gay sex is sin, and sin has consequences, y'all. Well, I'm here to say sex has consequences. Gay, straight, pan, bi, whatever the genre of sex you partake in, there's the potential for consequences. More than half of Americans are on this damn planet because straight folks want a raw dog, okay? Let's just be real. So I refuse to take on that shame. And I hope that if you're living with HIV and trying to talk to people about it, that you're able to do the same. I'll be honest about how I got it, but I'm not going to apologize for it. I'm not proud that I contracted HIV through unprotected sex, but we can't stigmatize our own behavior. I can acknowledge that I contracted HIV as the result of choices that I made in my sex life, but at no point should any of us be apologizing for promiscuity or drug use or any of the activities that lead to contracting HIV, especially while straight people are doing those very same things and no one's framing it as the perils of the heterosexual lifestyle. So I'm not recommending drug use or unprotected sex, but shame leads to silence, and silence leads to more shame. This is the foundation of harm reduction. Staying silent about how we got HIV only increases the amount of people who contract it in the same way. And regarding what I just said, you might be thinking, look, we cannot go out there and be honest about our gay sex and drug use and expect the general public to accept us. And again, you are right, which leads me to my final, most depressing lesson, which is know your enemy. That saying, know your enemy, originated in the 5th century BC in the art of war, and it's a cliche, it gets thrown around all the time. But in this case, the war is the battle against stigma, and the enemy is bigotry and ignorance. Now, I'm not trying to say that every time my set has bombed, it's the fault of bigotry, but I would love it if I could say that. But in New York comedy, you have what's called a barked-in audience, and that means that the audience is there because some poor comic was out on the streets of New York shouting at tourists, anybody want to see a comedy show? And the people that they get in are often Midwestern American tourists, small town folk, and these audiences skew very conservative. I don't know why. They come to New York, we don't have anything they'll like. And it's hard to perform for them just as a gay person, let alone talking about HIV. And the times in which this set has bombed horribly, it's because no matter how fast I tap danced, I could not get people to see me as anything but a carrier of pestilence. Know your enemy. We're here to open minds. I think that we have to accept, I certainly have had to accept, that an alarmingly large amount of people are just bigots. And what's worse is these people will stand by while all the progress we've made and our rights and our healthcare access is revoked. They won't bat an eye. And I end on this super depressing note because, as I said before, my ability to tell these jokes depends on all that progress. And our ability to have a sense of humor about HIV and go out there and tell people to be less afraid is built on a foundation of public policy, healthcare reform, and scientific advances. And we cannot take our eyes off the forces that would gladly destroy any or all of those things. And right now I'm in a country, USA, baby, where that base of bigots is more riled up and organized than they ever were before. Fighting stigma, I think, is a numbers game. Some folks are lost causes, and at the end of the day, it's about identifying support and mobilizing it, which is how you build a stand-up career as well, by the way. I don't need all of you to think I'm funny. I need about 5% of you to think I'm funny. It's an old Joan Rivers quote. I'll fill stadiums for years with 5% of you. So I'll wrap with this. I'm so grateful to all the activists and scientists who built this world that I'm able to tell my stupid dick jokes. I think humor is a necessary part of combating stigma, but it's also just a part of being a well-rounded human, which we're all able to do now because of the work that was done before us. And we as a community have to vigilantly safeguard the fruits of that labor in order to continue working and living and loving as well-rounded humans. And that's my spiel.
James, that was fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very inspiring. I appreciate you taking the time. You know, I wonder. So we're going to take some questions now.
Yeah.
If that's okay. And so I have a question actually. So why do you disclose in this way so publicly your HIV status? What drives you to do that?
Well, to be honest, it's probably pretty obvious. I'm a bit of an extrovert, and just for my own personal sake, there's very little that I don't share. And so I've had HIV for 3 years, and a lot of things go into my stand-up. It took me, I get, a year and a half or two before I did it. And that's very unlike me. And it was really starting to eat at me that I had this huge thing that I knew would make people so upset, but it didn't upset me, and it really bugged me that I wasn't open about it. When I was open about, I mean, literally everything else. I feel like I've already swore too much and been too vulgar, so I won't go into some of the other things, but it just didn't make the double standard within my own head didn't make any sense to me.
Right, fair enough. So there's another question here. I feel humor is a wonderful tool to use for healthcare workers. They're always so serious. How could you bring this to them? How would you bring this humor to them?
That's a hard one, I think, because I want to be clear that when I found out I was positive, I didn't know what undetectable was. And so I reacted to finding out I was positive in the same way that the audiences react. I was horrified. I went right back to 1985 in my head. And so it really depends on what point of the healthcare process you're in with a patient. I really struggled to even just have a conversation with my nurses and stuff. When for I would say 3 months, it took me, it wasn't until I was undetectable for a few months. And in America, again, I didn't have health insurance. I'm fortunate enough to be in a program where I have it. So it's a hard question. I think it really depends on how your patient is. And it's any comic would tell you, you have to read a room, if your patient can't even, look you in the eyes or, is struggling to remember their birthday because they're so anxious, that's probably not the time to do your type 5. But if you have a relationship with a patient, I think 100%. I'm so grateful for the doctors and the nurses who will joke with me and, feel it out, I guess would be, use your own organic sense of humor.
Right. Somebody has asked, have you come to Canada for any of your shows?
No, but if you're asking to book me, I will get a passport finally.
Right. Right. So somebody has said here, and you sort of went into this, but the reaction to the humor you use in your stand-up. I mean, you sort of, I guess it depends on the audience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever had to stop a show?
No.
No.
I've had to switch gears.
Right.
That's for sure. My mind honestly keeps going back to the worst experience I've had, which was a barked-in audience, and I got so mad that actually I did the opposite of stopping a show.
Right.
I think I went over and I did the longest version of my HIV set that I possibly could. I was pulling in jokes that I knew didn't work. I really rubbed their nose in it.
Well, good for you. And do you think that have you thought about doing a show just solely focused on HIV in your experience?
Well, stand-up is a weird game in New York. There's not it's very you have to get to a certain level to be doing even 15-minute sets longer on a regular basis, and I'm still at this level where most of the time I get in a stand-up realm is 15 at the most.
Okay.
Yeah, and then also it's not, like I said, being a well-rounded human, like I don't in my life it doesn't dominate that much, so it doesn't make sense to me to then do, if I'm talking about my life, an hour and a half of HIV.